welcome to the first of this year's lectures, masterclasses, whatever you like to call them. What we'll be doing over the year, I'll be doing two on each of your literature texts. And the idea is to try and hit this criteria. This you might recognise criteria for band 6, the highest band in literature, which is where you'll get over into and towards grade 9 eventually. So this is very much about pushing at the very highest level, and particularly about this idea of the third word there, conceptualized response. What I will try and do for you with each of the texts is approach it from a particular angle that maybe suggests a concept you might consider, a conceptualized approach to text you might consider. These are hopefully things then that you can take on board and use in your own responses. It's not really about me telling you an interpretation. It's about me raising up a concept and some of the ideas behind it that you can then take and shape in your own answers. Hopefully that will become clear as we go along. Now, today's lecture is then a Macbeth one, as you may well be aware, and it's focused around Macbeth in Act 5. Act 5 is often thought of as kind of like the poor man's act in here, and a lot of people don't study it. I remember when I first started teaching Macbeth, I used to do Act 5 relatively quickly. I used to basically show it on video and just discuss the key ideas in it, and spend all my time on Acts 1 and 2, and to a degree 3. But the more and more I've taught it, more and more time I've spent on Macbeth, the more and more I've thought that Act 5 is massively important, particularly in our view of Macbeth. As we know, of course, it's a tragedy. Because it's a tragedy, Macbeth is the tragic hero, and we are witnessing his downfall. But when we get to Act 5, we have to decide how we feel about what he's done. And this is very much what I'm asking here, is how are we meant to see Macbeth in Act 5? Are we meant to see him as a soldier? How he started off. Are we meant to see him as the tyrant, which of course is how he is referred to all the way through Act 5 by everybody else? Okay, the tyrant. So if we move on to this idea, I would suggest that there is a conflict between the two ideas here. The conflict between the two personas, if you like. I don't think Macbeth the soldier can be Macbeth the king. I think they are two very, very different roles. At the beginning, we saw Macbeth as a soldier. That's how we were introduced to him. And at the end, we are seeing him as a king. But I want to explore which one of those is dominating by the time we get to this final act. Which one of those is taking us further on board? First of all, in Act 1, you see, I would argue that he is presented entirely as a soldier. That was what his role is. And he's celebrated. People love him. Okay? He's complimented by everybody. Even Macduff at the beginning of Act 2 when he comes across him. This is great. They identify him as brave, incredibly brave. But we also notice, of course, how brutal he is. Remember, that first thing we hear about him is of him, essentially winning a battle or turning a battle single-handedly. But doing so by destroying a rebel leader, not by doing what most of us would do and going up to them and running them through with a sword, but by splitting them open on a battlefield, disemboweling them, deliberately cutting them so that their insides come out while they're still alive. It's a humiliation. That's a brutal way of behaving, and I think we see that in a number of different ways. But yet, the key word for him in Act 1 is valiant. He is constantly described as valiant, or with valor, valor's minion. However, valor, this idea of bravery, that is very much linked often to this concept of battle, of fighting. Okay? A valiant attempt, really going for it there. That's how he's seen at the beginning. But then when we get to Act 2, he's become the murderer. This is the transitional thing. This is where he's having to take on the role of being the murderer, going to commit it, and dealing with it afterwards. And what we notice is throughout Act 2, he's not in control. Right from that dagger speech, through his reaction with Lady Macbeth after the murder, through everybody else finding out, he struggles to retain any kind of control. That bravery seems to have gone, and he struggles with the brutality just of a murder. And then that leads into Acts 3 and 4, in which he is the king in both of them. He's not in Act 4 that much, as we know. But I would argue that his time in Act 3 and 4 is characterized by poor decision-making. As a king, he does not make good decisions. To be fair, I don't think he necessarily makes good decisions all the way through. I think he struggles with decision-making throughout the entire play, which is why Lady Macbeth is able to kind of manipulate him so easily. But particularly as king, think about his decision of what to do with Banquo. That's what brings about his downfall. Okay? Rather than get Banquo on his side, that's what happens there. What about Macduff? A desperately unfortunate decision, not unfortunate, desperately bad decision that happened. He's told by the witches to beware Macduff. So what's his response to that? Oh, I tell you what, I'll go and kill all of his family, because I won't have to beware him then. It's a dreadfully bad decision, and all of this leads towards giving motives for people to turn on him in Act 5. It's also worth noting that in these acts, I think it's arguable that the supernatural that put him where he is today actually turns on him. Now, some of you may be familiar with this argument already, but what I argue here is, if you go back to Act 2, Scene 2, the scene after he murders the king and he comes back in with Lady Macbeth, and he talks about how, having committed the murder, he comes back and he hears this praying going on, and he says, I couldn't say amen. You get obsessed with it. And then he says how he heard a voice saying, Macbeth will sleep no more. Now, if we take those to actually be true, rather than him in his own head, if we take that he actually really couldn't say amen, he'd been blocked from saying something religious. If we take it that there was a voice coming over going, Macbeth will sleep no more, Macbeth has murdered sleep, then what we're seeing is that the supernatural has turned on him the second he's done what it wants him to. The second he kills the king, it's right, I've got what I need from you now. Therefore, I'm going to turn on you. I don't need you anymore. I want chaos. So there's also that idea that the supernatural has taken a turn on him. And of course, we see that big difference between him at the beginning of the play, when the witches come and see him, and him in Act 4, Scene 1, when the witches are visited by him, and they are in much more control, and they dismiss him, and they cut over the top of him, and they decide what he can see and what he can't see. So there's a big change in the power of the supernatural. As he gains supposedly more power, the supernatural does as well. And that may be one of the reasons why he's a poor king. Instead, if you're interested in those the idea of pairings I've just suggested there, the idea that you do get an awful lot of scenes that are deliberately paired together to create contrast. You'll find on our YouTube channel another lecture masterclass I did last year that I won't be repeating this year, on Macbeth and pairings in Macbeth, okay, which you can look at for yourself there. Okay, so that introduces the point that I'm going for here, this conflict that's there. So let's see Macbeth as soldier in Act 5. There are many, many examples in Act 5, and we haven't seen them since Act 1. Many, many examples of the kind of person we were told about. Remember, we never saw Macbeth behave this way. We only heard about it repeated to us. The first time we saw him, he was meeting the witches, so we never really got to see what kind of person he is. Now we get this attempt here. We get lines like, and I put the line numbers there, and they're taken from your edition, so you can look them up if need be. When he says, I'll fight till from my bones my flesh be hacked. Look at the brutality of that. It's not just, saying, I'm a soldier, I'll fight till the end. He's talking about people hacking his flesh off his bones. How gruesome it is. It's almost like the idea that he'll carry on almost through death until his flesh is no longer a part of him. Later in the scene, when he finds out that Birnam Wood has come to Dunstone, one of the prophecies has gone wrong, his reaction is, okay, well, I'm carrying on fighting, and at least we'll die with harness on our back. Harness, of course, being armour. At least I'm going to die wearing armour. A proper soldier's death. Again, showing you very much the soldier at heart that he is. Even later on, at the beginning of the scene in which he'll actually end up dying, being killed, he uses this image of bear baiting. They've tied me to a stake. I cannot fly, but bear-like I must fight the course. Seeing himself as this bear, this grand creature that has to be chained to a stake to keep it under control, baited at by the others. This is it. I have to put up with it. But this is how he views himself. And then the following scene, this is the one in which he dies. Why should I play the Roman fool and die on mine own sword? Whiles I see lives, the gashes do better on them. Okay, at the beginning, that reference to the way that Roman generals were expected when they lost battles to fall on their own sword, to take responsibility for it. Referring to that as being a Roman fool. Why should I do that? Okay, so again, distinguish himself as a different kind of soldier, one who will keep walking, go towards it. But look at the brutality of that second line. While he can see people who are alive, he would rather see gashes on them than on himself. I may be going to die, but if there's people around me who are alive, I would much rather carve them up. I'd much rather see them bleed. Okay? The first line is accepting he's essentially going to lose, but the second shows that he will destroy people to the end. Now that then leads into one of his final statements when he says, I will not yield to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet. That is his final decision. This is when he, of course, finds out that Macduff is not a woman born, technically. All of the witches' prophecies have turned on him. He feels like he's destined to lose. But it would be humiliation. I will not kiss the ground before Malcolm's feet. I will not prostrate myself before him. He is going to fight. He's going to be a soldier till the very end. Look at that collection of phrases there and see the picture that gives you of a man in Act 5. Okay? The kind of person we are talking about here. He retains that bravery and that brutality throughout the act. It's like Macbeth the soldier has come back to us again. And he's in some ways there's something about him as a character when he does behave this way. Yet the thing is, as we said, the poor decisions continue during Act 5. In this scene, which is the first scene that he's in Act 5, a very important, very complex scene where lots of things happen. At the beginning of the scene, he's very open to people around about the witches and the prophecy. He's not even hiding it anymore. He has attendants all around him, the doctor in the room, and he starts talking about how Malcolm Malcolm's born of woman. Why should I fear him? All the spirits that have pronounced me thus have said that. He's saying this in front of everybody. You must be sitting there thinking, what the hell are you talking about? What spirits? Telling you what? You can't be, you live a charmed life. What are you on about? He doesn't hide that anymore. And we see that essentially in this, he appears to be completely governed by the supernatural. Throughout the act, he's constantly saying, coming back to these prophecies that he's been given, coming back to the idea, right, okay, you were born of woman when he slaughters young Seward. Okay? I am invincible. I cannot be defeated until Birnam comes to London. He's constantly going, and it knocks him when those things go against him. So even though he is the king, he's allowing himself to be governed by what he's been told rather than anything of his own kind. And finally, we can think about, again, the state that the country is apparently in. We hear it in Act 5, Scene 2. It's a small little scene. It's where a bunch of thanes get together and discuss why everybody's leaving him. They're leaving him as well. Why everyone's leaving and joining the other side. And there's plenty of other events that go on in there. But there's a number of things that they drop in that are there, obviously, to tell us that Scotland is in a dreadful state. They refer to Macbeth's secret murders. Now, they may, of course, be the ones we've seen in the play. But you just get the feeling they're suggesting there's a great deal more of them. They talk about his distempered cause, which is basically referring to his reign as king as being distempered, you know, disorganized, out of control. They talk about how there are minutely revolts, constant rebellions going on against him, not just this big one that's coming, but there's constant revolts going on, and point out that those he commands move only in command, nothing in love. He has lost the people there. So we've got the bravery and the brutality. We've got that we might admire, but we see that as a king, he continues to be very poor and make poor decisions. But there is one moment that might actually portray him as a proper king. It's very, very small, but it's important. It's again in that Act 5, Scene 3, when he's talking to the doctor, the Scottish doctor, because there are actually two in the play. He's talking to the doctor. First of all, most of the time he's talking about Lady Macbeth. Okay, and you may know it because it's that point which he refers to her as his patient rather than, you know, anything of affection, you know, my wife or the Queen or anything like that. But then he moves on and he suddenly turns around and starts talking about Scotland. If thou couldst, doctor, cast the water of my land, find her disease, and purge it to a sound and pristine health. I wish you could test the water, test the urine, basically, like do a urine test on Scotland and actually get rid of whatever is making it suffer. Now that seems to be genuinely selfless for a bit. Understanding that the country has gone wrong, understanding that things are not right, and wanting it to be better, seeing Scotland as diseased and wanting it to be healthy again. That's not about him and his ambition for once. It's an interesting little moment. Okay, so what we're seeing is that Macbeth the soldier retains the same we saw before, the bravery, the brutality that he's got there, and that seems to be the dominant thing. However, he is still the king. We see poor decisions, but we do see one moment that just suggests that it's almost despair from him, that he isn't succeeding in his role. But what I'm going to take you to is I'm going to take you to a slightly different argument. Soldier, tyrant, what about a third way? Because there are parts in Act 5 that I think are fascinating, absolutely fascinating, and really, for me, give a sense of the actual Macbeth we're meant to see at the end. And here's one of our main examples of it. Macbeth the philosopher. And it's fascinating to me that repeatedly in Act 5, Macbeth seems to show an understanding that things are coming to an end. Seems to show an understanding that he has failed. And most of all, most interestingly, that everything he's done has not been worth it. He hasn't gained from it. And he's going to suffer the consequences. And these small moments are often juxtaposed with those moments that we saw before about him as a soldier. He'll go off on one like this, and then he'll come back with I think this one is followed by I'll fight till for my bones, my flesh be hacked. So he'll go back and forth between them. But this fascinating little thing, small little contribution. Look at the first line, first words. I have lived long enough. I'm ready to die, basically, isn't it? I've lived long enough. My way of life, the way of life I've chosen, is fallen into the sere, into the yellow leaf. Autumn imagery, yeah, of the leaves turning yellow in autumn. I am reaching. My way of life is reaching its autumn. You think of it as a year, as a kind of a metaphor for it. It's coming towards the winter. It's coming towards its end. My time is up. I don't belong anymore. It's like, you can imagine somebody saying, I'm part of the past. And then he follows up by listing these things that you should have as you go into the autumn of your life. Okay? Honor, love, obedience, troops of friends. This is what should await you in old age because of what you've been through. Right? People honoring you, people loving you, people giving you respect and obedience, and many friends. But he realizes that because of his choices, he's not going to get any of those. Because what does he get instead? He gets cursed. And this really good phrase, not loud but deep. Not cursed out loud. People are cursing to his face. They do it behind their back, behind his back. But they're deep. Right? They really mean it. They really hate him. He gets honor from people, but he gets this lovely phrase, mouth honor, which I think is pretty straightforward and obvious. Only coming from the mouth, not from the heart, not from the head. Yeah? It's not meant. I get breath, words, I suppose he's referring to there, which the poor heart would fain deny, but dare not. People saying things that their heart wants to deny, wants to say is true, but they dare not deny it. They're only saying it because they're scared. They don't really mean it. And that's a really, really tight understanding there of his situation, isn't it? I messed it all up. This is all I get. I'm not going to get what I should do in old age. Everything's come to an end. And it's not the only time he does it. The famous Tomorrow speech that he delivers on the death of his wife, the suicide of his wife. It starts with one of these blunt moments when he seems to show he doesn't care anymore. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word. Always dismissing it as it's the wrong time. Wrong time for her to kill herself, right? But then launches into this famous and brilliant speech in which he muses on time and on life itself, deciding from his experience that having gone through everything he's done and all the things he's done to gain the kingship, to gain his ambitions. And remember, earlier in the play, he did in a soliloquy say very clearly that he didn't care about the life to come. He didn't care about the next life. He was only interested in fulfilling his ambitions in this life. But he talks about the idea that time just creeps on in a slow, petty pace, day after day after day after day. And the only time it stops is when time ends. That's all life is. Another day and another day and another day and another day, and then the end of time. Pointless. And the past, all of the importance of the past is that it has provided a light to show fools, people of no importance, the way to their death. So the future is just day after day after day. The past, just people die. He then goes into a succession of brilliant and beautiful metaphors for life. Out brief candle. Lovely image. the candle that burns slowly and slowly down, although it's brief, he's talking about, but of course, you know, it's left in our mind to remember that a small gust of wind blows it out before it's time. I often think to myself, is that where Elton John got his idea from? But there are. Who knows? Life is a walking shadow. It's not even the actual thing itself. It's just a shadow of reality that moves along. A bad actor strutting and fretting on a stage for an hour, and that's the end of it. That's all we do. We're strutting and fretting around, playing a part, and then that's the end. A story that an idiot tells you. There's lots of sound, there's lots of action, there's lots of emotion, but there's no meaning behind it. That's life, and that's where he goes. But again, interestingly, then immediately afterwards, he goes back to the other brutal Macbeth. A messenger comes in. Come on, you come to use your tongue. Story quickly. So that sentiment doesn't last. And then two things he says in response where he begins to understand what's going on with the witches. Each time they come after him finding out that prophecies have gone wrong. So the first one comes after he hears that Birnam Wood is apparently coming to Dunsinane, and the second one is after he finds out that Macduff is not a woman born. Okay. So the first one, he realizes that those witches were equivocating. I mean, it's not really a big jump, is it? I always say to my class, you know, it's pretty damn obvious, isn't it? Never understand, you know, why, if somebody says to you, not, by the way, you're invincible, but no, you won't be born, you won't be defeated by one of woman born. Surely you're thinking, hang on, why have you said it like that? There's a catch there, isn't there, really? Come on. It's one of those things where somebody's just like throwing something to make you hear one thing, go with the other. And of course, as we know in Act 4, Scene 1, he totally ignores the fact that the hallucination, so the phantoms that are conjured up and tell him these prophecies are actually literally telling him the reality. You know, a bloody child tells him none of woman born shall harm you. Hey, look, a bloody child, a child's been taken out of stomach. Look, see, and the most obvious one, the one where he's told Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane, you know, you won't be defeated until then, and he's told it by a child, the child of Duncan, with a crown. He's going to become king, holding a tree in his hand, because that's literally what they're going to do, and he never sees it. But he does come to an understanding here, and then finally at the end refers to them as juggling fiends, paltering with us in a double sense. Two ways in which he understands what's going on. Now, this is very, very important. I said at the beginning, he is a tragic hero. And at the end of a tragedy, this is what we have to have. We have to have the person who has fallen from grace realizing that what they did was a complete mess, a complete waste of time, was that they made the wrong decision, that they didn't gain from it. So what it comes round to in the end, for me, is we start where I went at the beginning, saying there is a conflict in Act 5 as identified between Macbeth the soldier and Macbeth the king. I would argue that it is resolved in Macbeth coming to a philosophical understanding of the truth. You see, he is a soldier. He is a great soldier. He's, from the beginning bit, one of the greatest soldiers there's ever been, by the sound of things. He's brave and he's brutal. He's a failure as a king. Everything's gone wrong. It didn't satisfy him even. But it's all resolved in the catharsis, that word that goes with tragedy, the bringing together of something so that things are resolved and we can leave the theatre feeling everything's tied up. His philosophical understanding that life is not what he thought it was, that life has more to it, and he has thrown it all away. So if you're discussing Macbeth and you're using Macbeth in Act 5, this is what I think you can take with it. You can discuss the way that Shakespeare is deliberately presenting a conflict between the Macbeth we saw at the beginning of the play and the Macbeth we see at the end of the play. And we're seeing it resolved in an understanding of life and of the reality of what he's done. Okay. Hope that made sense to you. Some others. And next week, I shall be doing a Christmas Carol lecture on Dickens and social change. Okay. But thanks for coming along.